The wind howled across the dunes, dragging plumes of red sand into the endless sky. Amastan, a Tuareg nomad, adjusted his indigo turban against the biting gusts as he guided his camel through the shifting terrain. The sun was a blistering eye overhead, and the world stretched in every direction like a barren sea. His journey was routine, a patrol between oases to check on trade routes and distant cousins. But something unusual broke the monotony that day. A splash of white disrupted the horizon. Curious, he approached. Lying half-buried near the remnants of an overturned cart was a pale woman, foreign, unconscious, her skin raw from the sun. Amastan dismounted, his dark eyes narrowing. He checked her pulse. Alive. Weak. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. He poured a trickle of water from his gourd into her mouth, and she stirred. Her accent was thick, trembling, unintelligible at first, but she clutched a small wooden cross and whispered a name, Margaret. Her dress was torn, the fabric unfamiliar to his world of flowing robes and desert silence. Despite every reason to leave, he hoisted her gently onto his camel, muttering a prayer. Something about her, so out of place, yet defiant against death, stirred something ancient in him. He had seen many travelers swallowed by the Sahara, but never one so fiercely alive. Margaret awoke to the rhythmic sway of a camel's gait, her head resting against rough woven fabric that smelled of leather and sand. Panic gripped her first. Where was she? Who was this man? But the sight of his indigo robes, his weathered face softened with concern, told her she wasn't in danger. Not yet. He didn't speak much, just short, calming words in Arabic or Tamashek, but his presence was steady, like a tree in a storm. He had given her water, shaded her with his cloak, and shared a portion of dried dates from his pouch. Her mind tried to recall the events. The missionary convoy ambushed by raiders, the screams, the dust, the crash of the cart. Everyone else, gone. By nightfall, they reached a crescent of rock sheltering a small encampment hidden between dunes. A fire crackled to life as Amastan's kin emerged, 2 women, an older man, and several children with curious eyes. They stared at Margaret like she had fallen from the moon. One of the women, veiled in soft blue, offered her food, spiced lentils and flatbread. Margaret accepted with shaking hands and a murmured, "Thank you," surprised when the woman responded in halting French. Communication would not be impossible after all. Amastan sat at a distance, sharpening his blade. His silence wasn't unfriendly, more cautious, observant. Margaret watched him from across the fire. She owed him her life. She knew nothing about him, but already, she could feel that the desert had changed her. It stripped away pretense. Here, survival was the only truth. And her fate, whether she liked it or not, was now tied to this mysterious nomad and the unforgiving land he called home. The next morning, Margaret awoke to a faint chill in the air. The desert before sunrise was quiet, its fury paused in delicate stillness. She sat up slowly, her muscles aching, her face raw from windburn. Amastan was already awake, kneeling in prayer as the first light kissed the horizon. She watched from a distance, touched by the reverence in his posture. There was something sacred in how he faced the rising sun, something she recognized from her own worship, different symbols, but the same yearning for divine presence. After breaking fast with bread and goat cheese, the group prepared to move. Amastan approached her with a question in Tamashek, then gestured north, then south. She pointed northeast, the direction of the missionary outpost. His brow furrowed. "War," he said, in a low voice. "Tribes fight. Caravan not safe." He tapped his chest. You stay safe. She understood the warning, but she felt helpless. Her mission was to teach, to serve, to spread the word. Could she do that from a desert camp? As they rode on through the golden dunes, Margaret began learning the rhythms of the desert. She asked names in broken French and offered her own in return. The children laughed at her pronunciation but warmed to her quickly. She noticed how the tribe moved like a flock, silent signals, glances, trust. Amastan rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. That night, as the wind picked up and sand spiraled into the firelight, Margaret sat beside Amastan. Why did you help me? She asked quietly. He was silent for a long moment before replying, because you were not yet meant to die. His words were simple, but they struck something deep inside her. The desert had taken everything, but it had also given her a beginning she never expected. Days melted into each other like heat ripples on the sand. Margaret grew stronger under the desert sun, her skin bronzing, her limbs hardening. She had learned to wrap her scarf against the wind, to walk barefoot when necessary, and to drink tea so strong it made her heart race. She still couldn't speak much of the Tuareg tongue, but the tribe's patience never wavered. The children taught her desert games. The women showed her how to grind millet. But it was Amastan she watched most closely. He was a man of quiet command, always alert, always listening to the language of the wind. At night, he would draw maps in the sand and whisper the names of stars. Margaret found herself drawn to those moments, his rough fingers tracing constellations, the warmth of the fire flickering in his dark eyes. She offered to teach him English, and in turn, he taught her words in Tamashek. Akal, for land. Amawal, for language. Tawalt, for heart. They spoke in half-languages and glances, learning each other the way one learns the desert. Not by rushing, but by surrendering. One evening, they encountered a desert patrol, armed men from a rival clan. Tension thickened the air. The visitors looked at Margaret with suspicion, their hands on their weapons. Amastan stepped between her and danger, his body a silent shield. There was shouting in Tamashek, threats exchanged. Margaret didn't understand it all, but she recognized defiance in Amastan's voice. Eventually, the strangers left, but something had shifted. Later, when they sat beneath the stars, Margaret whispered, "You risked your life for me." Amastan shrugged. "You are in my camp. My responsibility." But his eyes betrayed something deeper, something unspoken. The desert had its own language, and it was beginning to speak to both their hearts. The first sandstorm came without warning. One moment, the sky was a calm shade of bronze, the next, it roared with fury, turning day into darkness. The tribe moved quickly, tents were collapsed, animals secured, eyes wrapped in cloth. Amastan grabbed Margaret's hand and pulled her close, his voice cutting through the rising wind. "Stay low. Breathe through your scarf." She obeyed without question, clinging to him as the world disappeared in a swirl of fire-colored dust. For hours, they huddled together under a makeshift shelter of camel blankets and canvas. The wind howled like 1,000 demons, shaking the earth. Margaret had never known fear like this, not during her voyage from Scotland, not even when her convoy was ambushed. Here, the desert itself seemed alive, angry, ancient. She closed her eyes and whispered Psalm 91, her voice trembling. Beside her, Amastan murmured his own prayers in Arabic, the two voices mingling like a strange, sacred duet. When the storm finally passed, the world was ghostly. Sand buried everything, supplies, ropes, even parts of the tents. The camels groaned as they were dug out. Margaret coughed, her throat raw, her eyes stinging. Amastan checked the damage with practiced calm, directing the others, his voice firm. His leadership was unshakable. He was not just a wanderer, he was a guardian of this harsh realm. That night, around a small rekindled fire, Margaret reached for his hand. "If you hadn't been there, I would have died again," she whispered. Amastan didn't pull away. "We survive because we hold on to each other," he said. For the first time, she felt something more than gratitude. She felt a warmth bloom in her chest, not just for her rescuer, but for the man who had become her anchor in this wild, burning land. The days after the storm were quiet but heavy. The tribe moved slowly, recovering what they could, mapping a new path toward the northern oasis. Margaret rode beside Amastan now. Not because she was weak, but because it had become their silent habit. They spoke more freely in the evenings, trading stories in a mishmash of English, French, and Tamashek. She told him of Scotland, of green hills, misty rivers, and church bells. He told her of the desert, of blood feuds, sacred wells, and stars that never lied. There were moments when their hands would brush, and neither of them pulled away. When Margaret stumbled once on a rocky path, Amastan caught her by the waist and held her a second longer than needed. She searched his eyes, but he looked away. The rules of his people were strict. A Tuareg man did not court a foreigner. A woman alone with no clan was a question of honor and danger. But the desert had taught them both that rules often melt in the fire of necessity. At a rest stop near a salt flat, Margaret saw a group of Tuareg women whispering and glancing her way. She had grown used to the stares, but this time it stung. She realized what her presence meant. An outsider among a proud and ancient people. That night, she told Amastan, "I don't belong here, do I?" He paused, his voice low. "The desert decides who belongs. Not the people. Not even me." That answer comforted her more than she expected. She had come to the Sahara to teach, to serve, but now she was learning. Learning how to endure. How to live. And slowly, how to love a man whose world was carved by wind and silence, but whose heart held the fierce gentleness of an oasis after a storm. They first heard the warning from a trader passing through. Tribal tensions in the north had flared into open war. A rival clan, the Iforas, had begun raiding smaller encampments, taking camels, supplies, even hostages. Amastan's tribe was vulnerable, especially with a foreign woman among them. The elders debated at night under the stars, their voices tense, arguments etched into the desert wind. Margaret didn't understand every word, but she knew the fear in their eyes. Amastan grew quieter. He spent more time scouting the surrounding dunes, often returning with sand-dusted robes and a furrowed brow. One evening, Margaret found him sharpening his sword alone. "You're preparing for something," she said. He didn't deny it. "If they come, we cannot run fast enough. The women, the old ones, will have to defend." His eyes met hers. "You must leave with the next caravan." Her heart clenched. "No," she whispered. "I won't run again." But he stood firm, the unspoken fear rising between them. "If you die here, it will not be God who failed you, it will be me." Margaret stood there in silence, tears blurring her vision. She had never felt weaker. Not even during the storm. Not even when she lay dying in the sand. Because this time, what was breaking wasn't her body, it was something far more fragile, the bond between them. The caravan came 3 days later, a ragtag mix of traders and travelers bound for safer towns along the coast. Margaret packed in silence. The children cried. The women hugged her. Amastan didn't speak much that morning, he only placed a small leather pouch in her hand. Inside was a stone, smooth and black, warm from his palm. "So you'll remember the desert," he said. But she already knew, the desert would never leave her. The caravan moved steadily eastward, the camels' padded feet whispering across the sand. Margaret sat atop her mount, veil drawn against the heat, but nothing could shield her from the ache in her chest. The farther they went from Amastan's camp, the heavier the silence became. She should have been grateful, safe, headed toward civilization, toward the world she once knew. But all she felt was the slow unraveling of something sacred. Each night, around the fire with the traders, she found herself glancing at the stars they once named together. She held the smooth black stone he had given her, rubbing it between her fingers until her skin grew sore. The desert, in its harsh way, had taught her about truth, about love that doesn't bloom in gardens but survives in drought. And she had walked away from it. At a stop near an ancient oasis, the caravan leader approached her. "We're being followed," he said grimly. "Raiders. If they catch us, we can't defend ourselves." Margaret's heart seized. Was this how it would end? Lost again, with no one to come this time? But just before dawn, the sound of galloping hooves thundered over the dunes. A silhouette broke through the morning light, Amastan. His sword was drawn, his face painted with fierce resolve. Behind him rode 4 of his tribesmen, their indigo robes snapping like wings in the wind. The raiders scattered like flies, no match for warriors who knew the land. Margaret ran to him, tears streaking her face. "You came," she breathed. Amastan dismounted and took her hands. "The desert whispered," he said. And I listened. It was more than reunion, it was a declaration. That their journey wasn't over. That what bound them went beyond tribe or language. It was the desert itself, drawing 2 wandering souls into one story. The victory over the raiders was short-lived. News spread quickly, Amastan's intervention had drawn the wrath of the Iforas. By protecting a foreigner and defying tribal boundaries, he had not only risked his life but the peace of his people. Margaret heard the whispers. Some saw her as a blessing saved from the sand, others as a curse sent by the West. The elders summoned Amastan and gave him a choice: send the woman away or face exile with her. That night, the desert was still. Margaret sat by the fire, staring at the flames' quiet dance. She wanted to make the choice for him: leave, disappear, free him of the burden. But when Amastan joined her, she knew he had already decided. "I was a man of the desert before you came," he said softly, "but I was not alive." He knelt beside her and placed a silver ring, crafted from his father's blade, in her hand. "This is not our land anymore, it is our journey." She blinked back tears, realizing that love here did not come with roses or fanfare. It came with sacrifice. The next day, the couple stood on a rocky bluff overlooking the horizon. A small gathering surrounded them, Amastan's closest kin, and 2 women who had come to care deeply for Margaret. Under the desert sun, with the wind whispering old songs across the dunes, they exchanged vows in 2 tongues. No priest, no church, no temple. Just sand, sky, and truth. From that moment, they were no longer 2 strangers from distant lands. They were something new. A bond formed not by tradition, but by survival, trust, and the fierce beauty of a love that dared to defy the world. Months passed, and the desert changed, as it always did. The dunes shifted like memory, reshaping what had once seemed certain. Margaret and Amastan built a life along the edge of the Tenere, near a spring hidden from the chaos of tribal wars. Traders came and went, bringing word of battles, treaties, and shifting borders. But in their quiet haven, peace bloomed like desert flowers after rare rain. Margaret had long shed the garments of a missionary. She now wore flowing robes dyed in indigo and ochre, her veil wrapped with ease. Yet she hadn't lost her spirit. She taught the children to read, mixing the Bible's parables with stories of the prophet, teaching from both traditions with equal reverence. Her faith had deepened, not into dogma, but into something truer, shaped by fire, storm, and love. Amastan remained the sentinel of their world, guiding travelers through dangerous passages, settling disputes with wisdom earned from silence. He was still feared by some, respected by most. But in their home, he was simply her husband, the man who listened to the wind, who traced constellations on her back at night, who whispered, "You were written in the sand beside me before we ever met." One evening, as the stars emerged over the vast silence, they sat on a dune together. "Do you ever miss your homeland?" he asked. Margaret smiled. "Sometimes I miss the cold," she said, "but I never long to return." "Why?" he asked. "Because everything I was meant to find, I found here," she whispered. "In you. In this place." Above them, the stars shimmered, unchanged, eternal. Beneath them, the desert exhaled, cradling two hearts that were no longer foreign. And in that moment, they belonged, not just to each other, but to the land that had tested, broken, and ultimately united them.